a lot of controversy. The different sides accusing the other of encouraging, quote unquote, their supporters to go and fill the forms or go to these constituency centers and so on. And even some people accusing, I think on the news on Friday, that some of the forms being filled were fake forms, which are all going to go to the Office of the Clerk in the National Assembly today for the compilation, and then presented, I guess, to the members tomorrow. But what has maybe not surprised me, but disappointed me, I mean, this month or next month, I can't remember, will be for me 20 years since I first found out about the Stedman Research Company when, I think it was the Standard, published an article in a Saturday paper about the Kenyans no longer, in 2004, Kenyans no longer being most optimistic people on earth, which they had been immediately after Kibaki was elected in this international Gallup poll. I'd never heard of Stedman before. I called them on the phone, wanted to get their data because I was writing a report for the Afrobarometer that we had done in the latter part of 2003. And there I met, not Roger Stedman, but I met George Waititu, and that's how we became friends. And eventually I started doing some work for them. At that time, I think Maggie was working for them in Kampala, so we didn't meet her for a few years later. But what I say is not surprising, but a bit disappointing. Whether the government, the National Assembly, or Senate, or either the opponents or the supporters of impeachment, you would think, hope, you would think, after all these years of survey research on political issues, that somebody would come to us or perhaps to a number of survey firms and say, we want you to do a scientific poll because we know when there's public participation, it's not a representative national sample. It's only of those people, or mainly who feel very strongly about something, or people who have been induced or mobilized to participate. So with all due respect to the Office of the Clerk tomorrow, or today, who's going to be compiling all of these public participation input, it's like these social media surveys. It's only those who wanajitokeza alafu kura zao za maoni zinahesabiwa. But that's not representing anybody except those who knew about that survey and decided to get involved. Whereas when we do a survey, and the same with the National Bureau of Statistics, we use scientific methodology to produce a representative sample. Now, when we ask people, for example, do you support or oppose impeachment, we don't say, how strongly would you die for the cause, like some Al-Qaeda suicide bombers or whatever. We don't get into that because we know most people are busy with their own daily family and economic activities. They don't have time. Some people don't pay attention to these things so much. So we try to give what we think is, within the margin of error, a pretty good example. I'm not saying the Constitution itself, when it made this requirement for public participation, should have said, and they must use TIFA to give us scientific data. But they could have said, public participation should be, when possible, accompanied by scientific random polling. That could have been there as just as encouragement by the framers of the Constitution. But I knew some of those committee of experts, but they never asked me, what about polling? And we didn't know public participation was going to be such an issue. So we see, even among the DP's lawyers, some of them are going to use that argument in court. We were told by, I think, Nelson Havi the other day, or it was another lawyer who was on TV, I can't remember, that they're going to poke a lot of holes in the public participation process, beginning with the fact that it was only 2 days, and they think it should have been 4, and also it was done on Friday and Saturday, which for a sizable proportion of Kenyans are religious faith days, days of services, when people are busy performing their religious obligations in one house of worship or another. So they weren't going to come up with a random sample. That's one comment I wanted to make at the beginning. One other comment, and maybe I can elaborate a little bit later. There has been a great deal of controversy regarding the role of ethnicity in this impeachment process, especially by those who want the DP removed. And that reminded me, I was at a Vision 2030 review workshop in June 2018. And we had this very interesting discussion about the political pillars of Vision 2030, that Kenyan politics, and especially election, should move away from identity politics and more towards issue-based politics. And we could get into the details later. But it was the American Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tip O'Neill, an Irish American, about 30 years ago, who said all politics is local. Meaning, for elected leaders who are elected within a constituency, not the whole country like a president, the most important thing is not to chase away the voters who elected you. You have to keep them happy. So it doesn't surprise me from the data to see that the DP has much more support in his own area around the mountain. Not 100%, you'll see. But when Kenyans, or some people, accuse him of being a tribalist, I ask myself, as I'm looking at the American election campaign, Kenyan politics is not really issue-based in the sense that the different political parties have very, very distinctive different policies. Why not? I don't think, I mean, I've lived here more than 40 years. I don't think it's because Kenyans are such tribalists and they hate each other or anything like that. But the basic needs of the voters across this country are similar. You don't have a political party for the rich and one for the poor. You don't have one political party for landlords and another party for tenants. You don't have one political party for people with a lot of land and others for people with a little land or no land, because the vast majority of Kenyans, around half, are pretty poor. And any political party that would be just tailoring its appeal to a small section of the electorate of the population would never win any seats. Now, if you had a proportional representation system, it's a bit better. I'm not trying to defend the DP's comments, but when he says, and this was even repeated on, they showed the clip, one of his clips of this on Newsgang on Citizen the other night, about people from Mount Kenya being shareholders in the government. Surely, we know from our surveys and we know from IBC that about 75% of voters on the mountain voted for the Ruto Gachagua ticket. People in the coast, people in Western, people in other parts of the country, Nyanza and so on, only a minority voted for this government. So what's wrong with saying, because you people voted for us, you're going to get more benefits? The problem is the benefits are not policy difference benefits. Kenyans are just thinking of development inputs. When Harris says, if I'm elected, the rich are going to pay more taxes, she's not expecting to win any more votes from rich people by saying that. She's appealing to that slice of the population that is less well off because she knows they're more likely to vote for a Democratic candidate. And people are voting for Trump, or many of them. They know last time he gave a big tax break to the rich. It's because our politics, and in most developed countries, politics, people are differentiated more in economic terms. So it's not surprising that people would make different appeals on a policy basis, which you can't really do in Kenya. So I'm not trying to be the political advisor to the DP. I'm just trying to explain why it doesn't seem so surprising to me that he would make such a statement when so much of the support they got was from the mountain, except it's clear that because the needs of people in Kwale are pretty similar to the needs of people in Bondo, are pretty similar to the needs of people in Marsabit, aside from the drought conditions, you can see why I got into trouble making a statement like that, of carving out a section of the population. Anyway, we can come to these issues in a little more detail as we go on. How do I make this thing move? Oh, slide. Here we go. We have the executive summary, which we're not giving you now. We have some introductory comments, which you can read as you're putting together your articles. But as I said, there's a list here of the questions that this survey addresses. We'll go through them, so we don't have to go through them now. And we also made the point that for most of these results, we're presenting three categories. Total, that's all the respondents, and in some cases, only those respondents who are aware of the impeachment. And we didn't ask them, are you aware that the deputy president might be impeached in the National Assembly? Because that's giving them the answer in the question. Our question was, if you know which senior government official is facing impeachment and removal, and see if they could name the DP. So specific questions about impeachment were only asked to that. I think it's 76, 78% of the sample. I'll skip that. Okay, so we begin by asking people, before raising the subject of impeachment, sorry, I wanted to finish that thought. So we're presenting the results in three categories. All members of the sample, people from the Mount Kenya region, and then Kenyans from all other regions. And we want to emphasize that this is not, even for Mount Kenya, a strictly ethnic comparison. Because as we know, and I think you're aware from census, slightly above 10% of Kenya's population outside of Mount Kenya is made up from people of the mountain, what they call the Gema communities. And within the Mount Kenya region, slightly below 90% are people of many, many other ethnic groups who are living and working there. So please don't say the Mount Kenyan respondents that TIFA has shown is just Kikuyu, Embu, Meru, Tharaka, Tagishu, whatever. Meru, if I missed them. It's a geographic comparison, not an ethnic one. Any questions about that? Because as I say, we know from data. So we asked people, how would you rate the deputy president's performance so far? And we gave them the choices. Excellent, and then good, average, poor, and then very bad. And we just combined the two positive and the two negative ones. And to little surprise, you can see that people from his home area are much more positive about his performance than people from the rest of Kenya. Specifically, whereas 59% of people from the Mount Kenya region give him either an excellent or a good rating, from the rest of Kenya, it's less than half that, 27%. Not zero, but it's much less. And when you go to the poor and very bad ratings, it's the other way around. There's 11% on the mountain who give him the two lowest ratings, but almost 3 times as many, 28%, from the rest of the country who give him such a low rating. Now, from a point of view of academic research, we would want to find out these ratings that people are giving, how much is it based on information? They have different sets of information that they're using to judge, or is it just ethnic or regional loyalty? But we'll examine that in a little more detail as we go along. And because you're so few today, if you have a question, just interrupt me. Now, we also asked people, if you voted in the 2022 election, whom did you vote for? And we just took those who said they voted for William Ruto and those who said they voted for Raila Odinga. And we analyzed the data in the same way as the previous slide. Here we didn't combine excellent and good, so you can see the gradation. So you can see that aside from average, which is about the same for both groups of voters, people who voted for William Ruto in the last election are much more likely and much more positive about his performance, giving him excellent and good, pretty high figures, and very, very few are giving him poor or very bad figures. And the opposite is true among those who said they voted for Raila Odinga. But again, that's not a surprise, because we know, again from IEBC, that about 75% of people on the mountain voted for Ruto and Gachagua. So among those voters, it's not surprising. I'm not saying all of them are from the mountain. You saw the figures in the previous slide. But this, of course, includes voters from all over the country. It's not just regional. This is a political or electoral correlation. But again, based on how we know that 2022 vote was distributed, it makes sense. In a nutshell, if we look at the yellow bars, that is for those who said they voted for Raila, more of them are giving the deputy president negative ratings. Why would that be? What is it about those who voted for Odinga in 2022 which would make them more negative about the DP now? Is that because they know that the problems of the DP wouldn't be there if the president was supporting him, even if the president has been silent? And they also know the president has been very, very, very active in pushing Raila's candidacy for the AU chairmanship post in Addis. I leave that to you people in the media to do the interpretation. So even if the results are not overwhelmingly like from 0 to 100, you can definitely see the concentration of opinion there. Let's go to the next one. Now this is a kind of a logical internal test. We would assume that the more positive rating you give the DP, the less likely you would be to support removing him from office. Why sack a bus driver who never has an accident? Likewise, if you think that his performance is very bad, if the drivers had so many accidents, you'd want him replaced with another bus driver, wouldn't you? So again, we see a pretty clear correlation that those who oppose his impeachment are giving the DP much higher marks than those who support the impeachment. Just look at the excellent scores, 9 versus 24. Again, it's not 100%. Same for good. And then when we get down poor and very poor bad, it's the opposite. Again, makes sense. If you think his performance is bad, you're more likely to be supporting his removal. If we found the figures were the way around, I would think that our statistician was drunk at the time that he did the analysis. It wouldn't make sense, but this makes sense. Naisip ko pambe. Sana. These slides are what we like to do for kind of a logical consistency, to make sure the data is making sense to itself. Okay, then we ask the awareness question. that I mentioned earlier. Are you aware of any senior government official who is facing impeachment and removal from office? And more than 3/4 of Kenyans said yes. On the mountain, it was even higher, almost 9 out of 10. Not surprising, because that's where he comes from. And maybe there are also higher levels of literacy, maybe more media access on the mountain. I remember in the late 1970s, I met somebody who was doing a study of education. And Nyeri district, it was a district then, Nyeri district had the highest percentage of completion of primary school by girls of any district in Kenya, any in the country. There was the most equity between male and female students in public education in Nyeri compared to all the other districts in the country. I think there were 40. So we know that not just Nyeri, but people on the mountain have been plugged in to national events. And as I said, also, the DP happens to come from there, so that may be giving more attention. A little less awareness, only 3/4 in other regions. And for those who are aware, we didn't ask, how did you find out, or something like that. It was a short survey. You can't dig so deep. It wasn't a media. So we wouldn't say, oh, I read it in the Standard, or I heard it on KBC or whatever. Then we asked people a very specific question. On the mountain, how much support do you think there is for the deputy president? And that ranges in terms of the answers that the choices they were given, all the way from a great deal or almost total support, all the way down to almost no support. And you can see that people who come from the mountain were more likely to say he's got a great deal, if not total support, here, because that's where we are. Of course, people who live far from the mountain, whether in Lamu or in Migori, they're going to have less information about the political atmosphere on the mountain than people who are there. But because we saw that most people on the mountain, or more people on the mountain, gave the DP a higher rating, maybe they were also trying to boost him by saying that proportion is high. But notice, it's nothing like 100%. Even 7% of people on the mountain says he only has a little support, and 3% says he has almost none. Now, if I were a student of political sociology, I would want to go to the mountain and find out who are these 10% of people who are on the mountain who say he doesn't have much support. What makes them different from the majority who thinks he has a lot or a great deal of support? Why are they saying that? I would really like to have a cup of tea with them and find out. But you can see that among Kenyans overall, he's got higher figures for those who think his support on the mountain is higher. Remember that the Mount Kenyan population is about 30% of the total Kenyan population, so it's a big chunk if you take East and West Mountain altogether. And then we asked a very straightforward question: do you support or oppose the impeachment? Overall, Kenyans are pretty evenly divided. Slight plurality, 41% say they support it. Now, I know I've had this argument with some of my journalist friends. Plurality, what does that mean? I hope everybody knows. Kenyans don't like using the term very much. It means the largest number in a group of numbers, which is not 50%, which is not a majority, which is 50% plus 1. We call it a plurality. The biggest number in a group of numbers that's still less than half. So, support for impeachment and removal is a very small plurality, 41% versus 38%, which is just outside the margin of error for the survey. But on the mountain, it goes way down to 1/5, just 20% of people on the mountain. Still, 1/5 is nothing to sneeze at. Remember also that Raila Odinga did get 20% or slightly more in the election, with more than 2/3 of the people on the mountain against it. So when you saw the other day, and this is also mentioned in the Nation today, I was just reading, some of these MPs who put their signatures to approve the impeachment motion the other day are saying, oh, nimerudi mashinani, nimeongea na watu wangu, sasa nimeona sitonga mkono hiyo mswada nini this, whatever. They went back home and they heard what people were saying on the ground. And remember what Tip O'Neill, the American Speaker of the House of Representatives, all politics is local. These people want to be reelected in 3 years. So it'll be very interesting to see if when they vote today, how many of these people on the mountain will know that between 2/3 and 3/4 of people in that area don't like this impeachment. Now, every constituency is different, and I presume MPs from Kieni will have a better idea of what's going on in that constituency than they would in, I don't know, Nyeri Town or, oh, thanks. So every Mbunge will know his constituency well. When you see these MPs who are now distancing themselves from how they appended their signatures last week, now, did they know? Did any of them do a survey within their constituency to find out, or are they just relying on public participation, which, as I said, is very unscientific. It's not representative sample. Watu gani wanajitokeza kwenda kupeleka maoni yao on these forms? And we think this is scientific. Now, for those who said they support impeachment, we asked them, what's the main reason? And this was a single response. They could only give one answer. That's why these different figures add up to 100. And the main reason goes back to what I was mentioning before. They are accusing him of ethnic discrimination, this question, the issue about shareholders and blah, 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 which we could also call hate speech. Many people from some communities interpret that as being hostile to other communities. That was the plurality at 35%. The next highest figure at 20%. People made comments about poor performance, don't like his leadership, making false promises. I know he's been the chair of this special commission that was set up by the president to deal with reforms in the coffee sector. Maybe there's some coffee farmers who haven't been, we don't know the details. We didn't say what aspects of his leadership has disappointed you. We didn't get to those details. Some other respondents made references to corruption, abuse of office, and so on. But interestingly, 17% of those who said that they want him removed didn't give us a reason. Was that just because they don't like his ethnicity and they were shy to tell us? Or they've just been told by their political leaders, let's get him out, so they haven't actually thought of what the reason for getting him out is? No idea. But 17% of people who say they support something and then can't give a reason for it is pretty interesting from the point of view of research. And then for those opposing, we asked the same question. What's the main reason? You said you were opposed to his impeachment and removal. What's your main reason? Again, single response. And these responses, they were not read out in either question. We don't put words in people's mouths. If I'm going to ask you, if you could eat anything you want for dinner tonight, what would it be? Would it be I don't know, roast chicken? Or would it be Githeri? Well, no, I'm not going to give you the options. I want you to think freely without any influence from me as the interviewer. And you can see, by far, the plurality, although it's only 36%, is people think he's being targeted unfairly. Now, again, we didn't dig deeper and ask, what do you think is unfair about it? But some of the comments that they should both be impeached together, or we don't have enough information about what he's done wrong. Interestingly, when looking at these answers that were given independently, somebody says they both should be impeached, he should be forgiven, and they should make up, given a second chance, blah, blah, blah. I don't see anybody really trying to counter the, 11 charges that were brought by the MP from Kibwezi. Whoops. What happened? We have to wait for a generator? The second most frequent answer, 18%, they like his leadership style. They think he's honest. But you see a variety of these reasons that were given. And far fewer of those who opposed the impeachment wouldn't give any justification at all. Only 2% who said they were not sure, or NR, didn't give a response. Then the 17% on the impeachment side. And that, again, that shows me that this issue has polarized people often beyond specific reasons, especially when you look at some of these, like they should both be impeached. That's a question about fairness, but not giving us a reason as to why they should both be impeached. That he should be forgiven. Well, again, why? Sort of automatic position. And then we ran this data, just like we did for the DP's performance ratings. What do you think about the impeachment question, looking at it between those who say they voted for President Ruto in 2022 versus those who said they voted for former Prime Minister Odinga? And again, you can see a pretty clear distinction where a clear plurality of those who voted for the president, 45%, are opposing it. And a very strong plurality, in fact a majority, 54% of those who voted for Raila, are supporting it. Now again, is this having something to do with the perceived good relationship between Odinga and Ruto now over the AU? And the fact that 4 senior ODM leaders were appointed to cabinet recently to make this broad-based government? Is that why so many of those who say they voted for Odinga last time are supporting the DP's removal because they think that's what the president wants because he's remained silent? And going back to those who oppose, again, we know, as I said before, a very big chunk of Ruto's vote in 2022 came from Mount Kenya. And that's the place where we saw almost 75% of people against impeachment. Because that's the DP's home area, and they're supporting him. So there's almost an overlap between the Mount Kenya population and at least a chunk. I forget the figure, but I think almost half of all the votes that Ruto got in 2022 came from the mountain. The rest from Rift Valley and some from Coast and Western. So again, that's not surprising. And then we asked a question to everybody. What impact do you think the DP's impeachment and removal will have on the president's chances of re-election in 2027. And we read out the options: easier or more difficult. We didn't read out no difference. We wanted them to choose, and most of them did. And interestingly, across the country, most Kenyans, almost 3/4, 73%, think if he's removed, it's going to be more difficult for the president to be reelected, because everybody knows, or most people know, how many votes he got on the mountain last time. And even without this survey data, most Kenyans were aware that the DP has quite a bit of support on the mountain, clear majority support. Now you can see that people on the mountain are even more convinced than people in the rest of the country that the president's re-election will be more difficult. 83% versus 70% in other regions. But that's where the support for the DP is the highest, so maybe they're correct. Now, does this mean the president will lose the next election if the DP is removed? Of course not. We have no idea who his running mate would be. We have no idea who and how many the other candidates will be that will stand against him. So this has nothing to do with predicting the next election. So please don't go and say, oh, TIFA says Ruto's going to lose the next election if Gachagua is removed. Nonsense. We haven't said any such thing. We've just said this is what Kenyans think in terms of will it make it easier or more difficult. It can be more difficult and he can still win. I hope that's clear. There's nothing predictive about this. And I will beg my boss, Maggie Herreri here, if he's removed or if he's not removed, the next time we go do a survey, we ask this question. Now that the DP has been removed, or now that he has remained, how do you think that will affect the president's re-election? Yeah, we can ask that next time, once we know how this plays out. Then we ask the question, ikiwa Makamu wa Rais, Deputy President, is Bandiliwad, who do you think the president will appoint to replace him? And you can see, by far, Professor Interior CS Dr. Kithure Kindiki is in the lead, especially on the mountain. But even compared to all the others, he's leading all of them by far. Now, why is this the case? We've had a number of pro-impeachment leaders on the mountain, including a group of Njuri Ncheke elders, although some of them looked very young to me, marching in support of Professor Kindiki as the successor to Rigathi Gachagua if he's removed. And we also know, if you recall, just before presidential candidate William Ruto announced his choice of a running mate, you people in media reported, very interesting, that elected leaders on the mountain had been engaged in a confidential opinion poll as to whom they wanted candidate William Ruto to pick, and Professor Kindiki was the #1 choice. Remember that? Now, why he wasn't picked, I don't know. Some people said it's because Tharaka-Nithi is a smaller population area on the east of the mountain, and Gachagua comes from the larger Kikuyu community, so maybe there were more votes there. I don't know the reason why the professor wasn't picked. And we didn't ask the question, who got the most votes in the confidential UDA poll before the last election to be the DP running mate, to see if these people were aware of that. But you can also see a very, very high percentage across the board are not sure. And some others didn't respond because it's unclear. to many people, including me. This question: which leader do you think, as of now, best represents the interests of the Mount Kenya region? And here you can see that the Deputy President wins hands down. His plurality, 28% among all Kenyans, and that jumps up to almost half among people from the mountain. Quite a few, though, not sure. Among all Kenyans, 33%, one-third. But, and then you see the other names listed. But I ask you this rhetorical question. For people who named the Deputy President, whether they're on the mountain or other parts of the country, are they doing that mainly because he's Deputy President? Because he's holding the second most powerful office in the country as of now? Or they think he would be representing the best representative of Mount Kenyan interests, even if he's removed? Even if he just becomes a private citizen, who, if, as you know, if he's impeached and removed by the Senate, according to the Constitution, he can never hold public office again, whether elective or appointed. Would they still think he best represents the interests? So that is how much of their affirmation of his ability to represent the interests of the mountain is based on his proximity to power, as opposed to just who he is as an individual, what he stands for, what he believes, and so on. If it turns out that he gets removed, I will again beg Ms. Ireri to include this question in our next survey and see if these numbers change, and if so, in what direction, whether or not the new Deputy President is from Mount Kenya, irrespective of that. Now, you can argue and say, well, when you ask people a question like this, what's in their minds when you say best represents? What does that mean? And I'll leave that to each of you to ask yourselves in interpreting the results of this question. But, as I say, we'll know much more in a week or so what the actual outcome of this is. And then we have some concluding comments, and we lay out a number of scenarios as to what might happen. As I think I mentioned, it's too early to tell. He might resign so that at least he could stand again. Maybe the motion won't get enough signatures in National Assembly, or maybe it will, but in Senate it's not confirmed. We don't even know, or at least I don't even know tomorrow, if the DP himself is going to appear, or even his lawyers, to defend himself. We do know that, as reported by the media, he's got a very impressive legal team to defend him, led by Honorable Paul Mwite. So we'll see what's going to happen. I would say maybe one other comment here to summarize. Whatever you think of the motivation behind impeaching and removing him by those who are behind it, it is another example, as has been said by various commentators that I've been watching and reading. It shows the power of the country's constitution. Whether the grounds for removing him are, in your view, legitimate or not, you can remove a leader in this country if enough Kenyans are unhappy, for whatever reason. And that does show the power of the document. So that concludes. You'll have the methodological information. And as I maybe didn't say, this was a telephonic survey. As we've said before, whenever TIFA does a household survey on whatever subject, whether how people dispose of their waste or where they get medical care, whatever it is, whenever we send our interviews to people's houses, they always request them to give us their mobile phone number, or if they don't have one, of somebody else in the house. So when we want to do a survey very quickly and don't have the time to tuma vijana mashinani and kuhoji watu, we can do a phone survey. I don't know how many 100,000 phone numbers we have now. But now I'm not going to give the whole presentation all over again for you people who just came. But do we have any questions? I'm sure you people were paying close attention, which I appreciate, we all appreciate. So asking some questions is fine. As I said, the TIFA management will decide when we're going to release the remaining data from the survey, but I think it would probably be within the next week. Yes? Maggie? Will be released?
In the next 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay. There's no huge rush on the other issues. Questions? And please identify what media house you're from when you ask. Yes. 10% who did what? Who are supporting his impeachment? What was that 10%? Remind me. Yes.
At some point, could you go through like 2 or 3 slides or the thing that came last?
Yeah, I can do that. Let me just answer this question. Please remind me, while we're doing that, the people who've just come, we're going to be distributing this whole presentation to all your media houses, so I'm not going to spend much time, but let me just show you a couple of highlights. We asked our sample to rate the DP's performance, all the way from excellent to very bad, and we're showing our results for 3 groupings. The whole sample total, people who live in the Mount Kenya area, and that's why we released these results in those terms. We also released some results in terms of who people said they voted for president in the last election. And again, we see a pretty big contrast where people who voted for William Ruto are generally much more supportive of the DP than are people who voted for Raila Odinga, keeping in mind that about half of Ruto's vote came from the mountain, where the DP is quite popular. Slightly over 3/4 of all Kenyans were able to mention the name of the person, of the senior official who is now being subjected to the impeachment process. I'm still looking for my friend here for his 10%. We asked people how much support they think the DP has on the mountain, whether they come from there or not. And you can see the figures there, where people from the mountain are more likely to think he has more support than people who do not, who are in yellow. We also did a few correlations. Oh, sorry, this is the same one. Just, do you support or oppose the removal of the DP through impeachment? And we get a statistically even split between those who support and oppose, but on Mount Kenya, opposition is much, much stronger at between 2/3 and 3/4, 69%, whereas only 20% on the mountain support it. More than twice that percentage, 47% from the rest of Kenya, support his removal. Again, not surprising. And we asked for reasons among those who support his removal, what the main reason is. Single response, we didn't read these out. Same thing for those who oppose his impeachment. What's the main reason to oppose it? They oppose. We did not read them out. Only one answer allowed. We also correlated opinion on removing him or not by how people voted in the last election between Ruto and Raila. Again, you can see there's much more opposition to his removal among people who say they voted for President Ruto, because so many of he got 75% removal would have on the president's chances of re-election. And very few people think he'd have better chances wherever they come from. Then we also finally asked two questions. Whom do you expect to be appointed if the DP is removed? And which leader do you think best represents the interests of the Mount Kenya region? Have we got the question yet?
Yeah, it was,
Which one was it?
analysis of Mount Kenya vis-a-vis the other regions.
With regard to?
Page 5.
Pardon me? With regard to supporting or opposing?
The 10% from Mount Kenya region and the residents.
Is it this one? Whether you support or oppose his removal?
No, it was in the before the summary.
Page up.
Pardon?
Page 5.
Page 5.
We're going back up?
Yes.
Where is page 5? Where are we? We didn't show those other slides.
The comments. The introductory comments.
Oh, introductory comments. Let's see here. Yes, according to census data, slightly more than 10 is non-Gema. Whether they're Luos, Luyas, Kambas, Wazungus, whoever they are. You had a question about that?
I wanted to understand more on that because largely there is that assumption that maybe in areas only like Thika or Juja that you find non-Gema.
Yeah, we just take the whole Mount Kenya region as a geographic area without making any distinction between Nyandarua or Nyeri or Thika, Kiambu. We're just saying the whole area. It's not mono-ethnic, even if we're treating the Gema communities as one. We just wanted to make this clear. It's not a strictly ethnic comparison because I think it's 87, 88, I forget the exact percent, of the Mount Kenya area is Gema, one or other Gema community, but there's 12 or 13% of these others. So it's not, and likewise, if you look at the whole rest of Kenya, around 12, 13% of it is originally Gema. You have Merus in Mombasa or Kikuyus in Lamu or in Nairobi or Kakamega. So we just want to say this is not a purely ethnic contrast. So thank you for raising that again.
You said like generally they are almost like 30% of the whole population.
Of the total country, yes. Because I think Kikuyus are around 22%, Merus are around 6%, Embus another 2 or 3%. I'm not sure. I don't have those 2019 census figures in my mind exactly, but it's close to 1/3 of the whole country is Gema. Good. Any other question? No?
Any surprises?
Yeah. Were you surprised by any of these results?
Yes.
What surprised you? His name, the former president's name there?
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
He's number 1, 2, 3, 4. 5% overall, 4% among people of the mountain, 6% people outside. Well, he's still, according to the court that overruled the political parties dispute tribunal, the chairman of Jubilee. So it doesn't surprise me that at least some people on the mountain, he's the best representative of their interests. You thought he would be at 0 now?
Feeling away from all these wrangles that with facing Gachagua, that he may not this.
Well, as I say, I mean, at number 4, I would be surprised if he's at 0. I would be even more surprised if he was number 1 or number 2. Because as you say, he's been very quiet lately. But for him not to be mentioned at all, when he was president for 2 years, and remember, he's the last and only surviving retired president from the mountain. The two others are marehemu, that is his father and Mwai Kibaki. So maybe if Gachagua were the president, he would be close to 100%, but he's only the deputy, whereas Uhuru was a full president. And you're raising another interesting question. Did some of the people from the mountain, half, who did not mention him, is that because they think soon he won't be a deputy president anymore? So why mention him as representing their interests the best when he might be out of a job? I don't know. As I said when I presented the slide, I don't know, actually it was another slide, whether the support he's getting on the mountain is because of his performance or just because that's where he comes from. It's probably a mixture for most people. I mean, like people who are supporting Trump or Harris, it's partly because one's a white man, the other woman is part Asian, Indian, and Jamaican, wherever her father came from. But also they have very different policies. So people will support or oppose them for a mixture of reasons. Usually not one reason only. Yes?
From your analysis, you say Kenyan is not issue-based.
In terms of party politics,
From your observation all these years.
in terms of party politics, it's easy to put out a manifesto. But basically, the needs of Kenyans, of 95% of Kenyans are the same. Healthcare, education system that works, support for agriculture, because most Kenyans, even who live in the city, have a shamba at home. You don't have political parties organized on the basis of different interest groups, because your society has not developed in that way, at least yet. But as I said, if you had a proportional representation system where political parties didn't have to be national, and you elected a leader of government as a prime minister based on votes of MPs, then you could have a party for fishermen, you could have a party for pastoralists, you could have a party for, I don't know, landlords. Every party elects 2, 3, 5, 20 MPs, and then they go to Bunge, and they negotiate to see who their leaders are going to be, like in some European countries where they have proportional representation systems. But in a country like this, I'm not saying all Kenyans are living the same lives. No. The gap between the rich and the poor here is among the greatest in any country in the world. But those who are in the top 1 or 2% are too few to elect anybody on their own. You can't have a party, chama chama tajiri. How many MPs would they elect? Maybe you and Maggie. But only people who would vote for. No, I mean, the mass of people are suffering the same, from the same challenges. So that, now that's not to say there aren't a lot of issues that people disagree about. They disagree all the time. The transition from NHIF to SHA and so on and so forth. Look at the disagreement about the university, the 5 bans for support of students. But you don't see one political party taking one position and another political party taking another position. Because these political parties are appealing to the same voters, even if election were next week. It'd be easy for the opposition to criticize and say the government has made a mess of it. But that doesn't mean they would have a different policy necessarily. So I hope we understand each other. Depends on the socio-economic structure of the country. And one other thing I'll say about that. You know very well, if you fly over Kenya in a helicopter or an airplane and you look down, you can see basically 3 areas. You see parts of the country that get a lot of rainfall, where you can grow food all the year round. You have some places that marginally they're agricultural, but they really depend on good rain or they don't get much to eat. And then there are the asal, the arid and semi-arid areas, which are basically pastoral or other kinds of activities, smuggling or whatever they do there to stay alive. So the fact that most ethnic groups live in particular parts of the country means that their needs are a bit different. People at the coast, their needs are a bit different from people in Moranga. But the Political Parties Act does not allow for district or regional-based parties. Parties are supposed to be national. So you have to be welcoming to everyone. And that makes it, again, more difficult. You can't have just a party for coffee farmers, no matter how specific their needs are. That doesn't mean that there are not some MPs who come from coffee-growing areas that aren't very concerned when they go to Bunge to try to advocate for the needs of their coffee farmers, or herdsmen in Northeastern or whatever. But you can't have a political party organized like that, as long as the political parties have to be national. Gu yako na nyororo, na mawe. Huwezi kushindana na Olympics. There's no way you can run, Bana, when you have chains and rocks tied to your legs. That's just how things are. You could be a very good runner. I don't mean that. Okay? And maybe I'll just end by saying, we at TIFA, when we do our research and present it to people in the media, we try. We don't always succeed very well, but we like to try, not just saying 25% said yes, or 62% said no, or 40% said they would do this or they would do that. We like to give you the kind of correlations like we've done here with regions, like we've done here with the 2022 presidential vote, like we've done internally support or opposition to the impeachment motion, correlating that with some other questions, that we can go a little bit deeper in the data for at least raising the question, when people within a particular area or who did something, like voted for Ruto or Raila, and it's not 100% of them who are now taking a position on a particular issue or another question. What is it that makes them different among each other? And as I said before, that's a question for research, political sociology. Everybody in this room has different opinions on any subject. I mean, some of you might agree on something, but you'll have many different opinions. So from the point of view of academic research, we want to know, why is it? Is it your age? Is it your gender? Is it how much money you're making? Is it your family background, your religious affiliation, your ethnic community, your sub-ethnic community? You go to a place like Kibwezi, where almost everybody is a Kamba, and yet they vote. They don't all vote wiper in elections. You'll get 10, 15, 20% who will vote for another party. What makes those people different from the majority? And that research you really have to do on the ground. That's the kind of research I did for my doctorate at the Coast, studying coast politics. It's very, very interesting. But I had a couple of years to interview people and do surveys and talk to political leaders. It takes time. Okay. Thank you very much. We hope, and let me give you, I mean, it's there on the presentation, but if you need to call me before the end of the day when you're doing your stories, make sure you have my number, 0733 637 023. And I'm also happy to say, is there anybody here from Nation? Wonderful. Next Saturday, Nation, we'll have an article about my American country music band. We played in a concert in Nakuru last Saturday. It was supposed to be in this Saturday's, but you're...
I live in Nairobi, isn't it? I come from Mount Kenya, but in this analysis, I've been put as other regions. Yeah. So just to emphasize
because we were not asking people what tribe are you. No, we just decided let's look at the geographical scope and see the outcome. I think if we had understood the tribal affiliation, the results would be slightly different, but not so different. I just wanted to emphasize on that, yeah? So you don't go and say the Mount Kenya speakers, no. It is geographical analysis. Sawa sawa. So I just want to thank you very much for attending this session. Of course, when we publish results, they're just for allowing people to make decisions with information, inform debates, and also give the true situation on the ground. When we were going to do this study, I'm sure maybe you thought the results would be skewed towards a certain direction, but these are the results. So thank you very much, and have a lovely afternoon and a great week ahead. Thank you.
Compiling these public participation forms. The next time you're at Bunge and you talk to the clerk, tell him, suggest. From sure, then we compare the results. But this kujitokeza to fill as a form is not going to give a scientific sample, whether it's on an online survey or what we saw over the weekend.